I'm going to tell you a story this morning, a true story. And it's a story about women and girls particularly who were able to transform a community in which sickness and diarrhea were the norm. They were a normal standard of life and so often death. It was a community in which, after the last election, there was civil war. Neighbors fighting neighbors, even families divided down the middle, fighting against each other. In many cases, fighting over lack of water, lacking the access to other important things in life. It's a story about how women and young ladies were able to transform the community. The background, 1.2 million people in this particular area of Kenya without access to safe water. And the corollary of that is, in the absence of safe water, these women often had to trek 6 kilometers. They'd go down to the valley for water and then lift these jerry cans, 20 liters of water, that's 44 pounds to 50 pounds. Try lifting one, let alone walking with one for 6 kilometers. And that's a typical scene you'd see first thing in the morning. The lady is going out to find water, which could be in a dirty stream such as that, or it might be a mud hole in the dried up bed of a river, or it may be that polluted pond. This was typical of the life before the women in this community became engaged and addressed the issue. And that's typical of what you see in that part of Africa. Every day, the women go out first thing in the morning, and in many cases, they're making several trips a day. The consequences of that, of course, are obvious. They're too tired to do anything else. The girls are exhausted. If they go to school at all, they're arriving late, but in most cases, they're tired. And there are no resources, no women to even teach the children. A very depressed community. Poverty was rife, homelessness, strife characterized the community. So then, the initiative of a Rotary Club, it's a small club, 35 members in all, and as in any organization, maybe 10, 20% active people, 5 or 6 people said, we can do something about this. And the technology, which is a small part of the whole, was to build rainwater harvesting, catching the rain. And John mentioned earlier, there is lots of water everywhere. There is, but we don't catch it. We don't use it. We let it run away. But in this case, let's catch it and build these cisterns. And it's a story of how these cisterns were built and their impact that I want to talk to you this morning. First of all, they empowered the women. These are groups of women. They call them merry-go-rounds. They're women who work together, and one of the basic functions originally was to supervise the burial grounds. These women were brought in. They were asked if they wanted to help. They said yes. So then they trained them. They trained them in various arts. And from that small club of active 10 people, they created 20 groups of women like this. And now they've brought water to 4,000 households, which is roughly 35,000 people, from a core of 5 committed, passionate people. One of the other things they did was say, money is the name of the game here. We want these people to be self-sufficient. It has to be sustainable. Therefore, money is the issue. Let's create a small bank. So they created this small, they called it a table bank, and for obvious reasons. This is where the women could make a deposit, and they could borrow money. They could borrow money for, let's say, to buy sewing machines, buy cloth, buy animals, buy produce, and so forth, as an investment. But before they could do anything, they had to commit $10, or the equivalent thereof, which is about 100 Kenyan shillings. They had to commit to planting 100 trees. They also had to agree to build a latrine. And the trees were essential there because before they got the water safely, they were burning the wood to purify the water. Also, the trees protect the ground from erosion. That was a commitment they had to make. There's a typical latrine which they built for a house, and you'll notice very significantly right outside the door, a little plastic can with water. One of the things they're also teaching is when you've been to the toilet, wash your hands. In fact, if we could do this in all of Africa, we'd reduce by 45% the amount of diarrhea and other intestinal diseases. But then the next thing was to give the materials to build these cisterns. Masonry blocks, cement, chicken wire and a few other things. And here, the householders, under the instruction and direction of those women you saw earlier, are actually building a cistern. They make the cement, they work together, and eventually you have the kind of cistern you saw on that earlier diagram. And they provide the gutters and the downspouts too to collect the water. Rainwater harvesting frees the women from the drudgery of hauling water. They now have a source of clean water at their household. And the second message is that the Microbank lends them money to start a business. And this was the transformation. Once the women were free from hauling water, and now there's a bank, they could enter into small-scale businesses. Here's a delightful lady who's opened a small produce store, 10 by 10. But this woman used to spend all day hauling water. She now has a business selling produce within the community. Look at the smile on that girl's face. She also used to spend all day hauling water, but she borrowed money from the Microbank. She's freed from hauling water, so she now can sew garments, earn a living. And this is replicated in some 4,000 households in an area close to a radius of 50 kilometers outside this town of Nakuru, 2 hours west from Nairobi. Another venturesome woman bought 2 rabbits. And of course, provided the right sex, we all know what rabbits do very well and very frequently. And she's now in the rabbit business, a source of meat for her family, a source of revenue from selling the rabbits, which enabled her to pay off the loan which she'd borrowed to buy the rabbits in the first place. And so many, many examples of that. Aquaculture, fish farms, growing produce and what have. And this, I think, is the most wonderful example of all. I see Elizabeth every time I go back there. This woman used to haul water. She then bought some rabbits, graduated from rabbits to goats. Now she grows cabbages. This woman, who used to spend all day hauling water, now has 3 crops of cabbages a year because of the climate, and she nets, after all expenses, $1,300 a year. What an incredible transformation that came about as a result of helping these people catch the water off the roof and preserve it. And the husband, who used to be a drunkard, he had nothing to do, he now works for her. She'd invested in goats, he is the goat herd, and she's cracking the whip. Even though these may have been traditionally patriarchal societies, the balance is shifting. And we have to invest in the women, particularly in those communities, if we want the change. So, in summary, this program does more than provide safe water. And when we're asked to support any water program, very often you'll be asked to provide money for wells or something like that. It's far more than providing water. In fact, if we only think of any program as just providing water, we're missing the point. Water is a means to a better life and livelihood. Women are creating economic value for the first time. When we look around the world, by the way, in fact, in Africa alone, there are 40 billion women hours spent hauling water. Think what could happen if those 40 billion hours were converted into some economic value-adding occupation, such as those simple ones you saw there. And there are so many other possibilities. Microbanks give people money, but more than that, they give them hope. Without money, there's not a lot of hope. But now suddenly, they see money, they have money, they can borrow money, they can use it. It's the beginning of a life which they have never known before. Crops and livestock flourish. An end to poverty. The beginning of food security. Food supplies assured. The children are healthier. Most important of all, not only that, the women are sending their children to school. But the last time I was there, I spoke to Elizabeth. I said, Elizabeth, and I've been working there, by the way, for close to 5 years, on and off, helping that Rotary Club. Elizabeth, tell me, what difference has it made to your life? I thought she'd say something about health care, less visits to the doctor and so forth. She looked at me and said, Ron, I can send my son to school. You know, the difference between Elizabeth and us is that they were born in a different postal code. They chose different parents. It's successful because it's owned by the community. This isn't a program that's owned by some well-intentioned NGO in North America that sends money over there and tells people how to do things. The Nakuru Rotary Club, this small group of people in this community, invested in the people, not in technology. So whenever anybody comes to you with the latest gizmo to save water, purify water, improve sanitation, forget the particular technology and say, how are we going to build capacity in those communities? Admittedly, the people don't have the kind of education that you will have. But because they haven't an education doesn't mean they don't have abilities and street smarts. And they certainly have an ability to work together. The women's group extended the club's reach. Small group of 5 active people in one Rotary Club, then motivated and commissioned 30 of these women's community groups, and they in turn went out into some 250 different communities, helping them, training them, showing them how to manage money, showing them how to build the systems and provide the money. The Rotarians made it's a multi-year commitment. That is, I won't bother, this is a Rotary subtlety, but so often Rotary clubs think of 1 year. This is a multi-year commitment. They trained and they employ skilled people. We train the people. Don't do things for people, you create a dependency. Help people do things for themselves. And of course, that's one of the fundamental underlying problems with so much aid. We do things for people. We send things over there. I've got a few minutes left. I'm just going to give you one example of how we can destroy people. Somebody in the United States read that malaria is a plague in this part of the country, and it is. So they said, wow. And they'd been approached by a manufacturer of mosquito nets and said, look, you buy 8,000 of these mosquito nets, ship them over to Africa, and we'll make sure they're given to the people who need them. Sounds wonderful. You know, that's a sub-story. Many of us would fall for it if we didn't think more about it. What happened is that people gave a lot of money. They were about $8 a net. Big money. They were shipped over there. When they arrived in Africa, what do you think happened? The local manufacturer of mosquito nets was put out of business. We never thought of the consequences of that well-intentioned effort. So whenever anybody asks you to ship something over to that part of the world, really ask yourself, what are the consequences? There are trained people and skilled people. Let's train them and let's help them to lift themselves up by the bootstraps. Individual households had to put skin in the game. Stop giving things to people. I have a good friend in India, wonderful Indian. He says to me, Ron, he said, if you give people what you want to give them, it has no value. You must give them what they want. And yet, how often do we see well-intentioned organizations here in North America saying, we want to do this. We want to go and drill wells in country X without even talking to the community. In another case, a group wanted to, go and build sanitation system, toilets and so forth. And they went over to do that. They talked to the elders in the tribe, and the elders said, no, we want a school. And these well-intentioned people from the United Nations said, no, you've really got to improve the sanitation. This defecating outside cannot continue. The chief said, I'm sorry, we want a school. Anyway, this group decided to build the toilets. They went back a year and a half later, found that nobody was using the toilets. So they talked to the chief in the village and said, what happened? He said, well, the people are used to defecating out there in the bushes. It's natural, it's nature, and they certainly don't want to use your damn stinking toilets. They want a school. We've got to listen. We've got to give people what they want. And this is an example. And get the people to commit, put skin in the game. Safe Water enabled Elizabeth to send her son to school. Replicate this on 1,000, 100,000, 1,000,000 times, and we can begin to see how the world will change in that part of Africa, particularly, but other parts of the developing world too.